and welcome to the fourth event of our speaker series, Social Policy Unpacked, Exploring Pathways for Green and Digital Transitions. The series is co-organized by the Directorate-General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion and the ZOE Institute for Future Fit Economies. It is funded under the Horizon Europe program. My name is Jakob Hafele. I'm the co-founder of the ZOE Institute and senior policy consultant. And yeah, ZOE is a think and do tank working at the interface of science and policy. And we're specialized on co-creation and also new economic thinking. With this speaker series, we want to invite policymakers, but also the wider public, to think outside the box and to be inspired by new ideas. We want to ensure that the Green Deal, that the transition to live within planetary boundaries is going to be fair and successful. It is the social question, or let's say the socio-economic question, that is at the heart of a successful Green Deal. And with this speaker series, we will take a variety of perspectives and shed light on the context and implications of this transition, both social policy, but also regarding the gaps for research and innovation. We have 12 online seminars running from December 22 until June 23. Next week, or in 2 weeks, sorry, on the 2nd of March, we will have Professor Vivian Schmidt from Boston University talking on populist challenges to social cohesion. We will have more events. Please make sure you follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. And yeah, we will advertise those events, and you can also check the recordings after the event on our homepage, and you will find the slides there as well. We will start with a presentation of roughly 30 minutes and followed by a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Nadia from Unit F3 at DG Employment, the co-host of this event. And during the intervention, we will collect your questions in Slido. You can find the link in the chat. And if you have any problems, you can also put the question in the chat and we will put it on Slido. You can use the QR code you can see in the slides. And don't forget to vote with thumbs up for the relevant questions. And yeah, we will take them up after the intervention. Having said that, I am thrilled that we have you here both, Professor Claudius Gräbner-Radkowitsch and Jakob Hafele. Claudius is an economist affiliated with the Europa-University Flenburg. He's also research associate at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz in Austria and fellow at the ZOE Institute. Jakob Hafele is co-founder and executive director and head economist at the ZOE Institute, and together have frequently collaborated already on this topic around socio-economic polarization and convergence in the EU, as well as industrial policy. The topic is quite timely. I think we managed well to put it just 1 week before the Net Zero Industry Act is going to be introduced. And of course, they will contribute to key questions that we face here. How can climate change mitigation and socio-economic convergence in the EU be addressed together? What kind of industrial policy is needed for that? And what does that mean for social policy? Claudius, Jakob, it's so great to have you here. And I leave it here and don't waste any more time with introduction. And yeah, stage is yours. We are very curious to see or to listen what you have to tell us. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph, for the invitation and the possibility to give this short presentation. So I hope the screen sharing works. And yeah, welcome also from my side. So we will consume your next about 30 minutes to talk about this twin challenge of economic convergence in the EU and making the green transition work. And what we try to do in the next minutes is to convince you that these two challenges are very much interrelated and should be thought together. And we want to make some sketches of or proposals of how they can actually be addressed together. So in case you do not like the presentation or you have more important things to attend to in 10 minutes, we thought that we give you a preview of our key messages of the presentation right in the beginning. So there are actually 4 of these key messages, which we want to substantiate in the next 30 minutes, of course. So first of all, I think we all agree that the green transition in Europe is essential. But what we do want to stress is that the opportunities and challenges that come with the green transition are very unequally distributed across countries and regions in the European Union, and that this comes with particular challenges. Especially because these unequal starting points for the different countries bear the danger of turning into a socio-economic divergence, and in the end also a failure of the green transition, because those countries who fear that they are facing particular challenges or on the losing side might have the institutional possibilities to block important policies that on the other hand are important to make the green transition work. So this inequality or this convergence problem is something important to take into account right from the beginning. We also believe that the green transition is not doomed to fail because of this, but there are certain tools that we should use in order to address the challenges just mentioned. These tools are in the end a mix of active industrial and energy policy. And I think what's important for us to stress is that this set of tools must go beyond market-based policies, because they alone will not suffice to counteract this unequal distribution of opportunities and challenges from the beginning. And we want to close with a remark that is always a little bit unsatisfactory, but I think very important, is that the right policies are very likely to be country-specific, that we most likely will not come up with a set of policies that work equally in every country, but that we need to think about institutional specificities of EU member states when thinking about the right tools to make the green transition work. So this is basically the 4 key messages, and now we want to take some time to substantiate them. I want to start with stressing again why this focus on economic convergence is so essential in this work. On the one hand, economic convergence is part of the EU identity. It can be found in the EU treaties, at least since the Maastricht Treaty, that stresses the importance of economic, social, and territorial cohesion. And maybe even more importantly, it's also one of the key narratives of the European Union. So like Ursula von der Leyen recently also stressed it when she talked or named it a core promise of our union. So this promise of socioeconomic convergence is part of the key identity of the European Union, and it's important to take it seriously also when talking about legally different subjects such as the green transition. And then obviously, it's a good next step to look a little bit in the past, how the convergence has been working out in previous decades. Now I will do something that, I don't know, in the ZOE Institute might be a little bit, I don't know how well it is perceived, but actually to talk about the convergence, I will focus here on GDP per capita, which is of course not the best measure for economic well-being, but for the sake of brevity, I focus on this measure in the future. We also see a key problem here that right now there are a lot of countries in the European Union, and talking about every single country would probably be too much. And even more, it's actually, when looking at a graph like this, it's really hard to tell how well convergence has been going in the previous decades on the countries level. So therefore, when I'm talking about convergence in the next time, I'm aggregating countries to country groups. Actually, I'm referring to 4 of them. Countries that have a strong focus on the financial sector, the finance cluster here, countries in Central Europe, Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Germany, and Sweden, the Central European countries, Southern European countries, France, Greece, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and the so-called Eastern European catch-up countries, those countries who have joined the European Union in the previous decades from the East. There is actually a lot of literature on why this classification makes sense, but for now, I just want to use it for pragmatic reasons to illustrate this long-term dynamics of convergence. To make it even the challenge even a little bit more visible, I have another plot which basically shows the same data, but with using Central Europe as a baseline. Because here we see very nicely that over the last decades, the finance countries have surpassed Central Europe in terms of GDP per capita. But what is even more important here is the message on the one hand that Southern European countries actually have lost ground with regard to Central Europe, but that Eastern European countries, while starting from very low levels of GDP per capita, have experienced a certain process of catching up, but are still on relative low levels of GDP per capita. And it's particular this catching up story from the Eastern European countries that is often used as a central element of the convergence story in the European Union, because also many countries in the East joined the European Union based on this promise of socio-economic convergence. Yet we think that it's also a very good example to illustrate the opportunities and challenges when it comes to the green transition. Because in many ways, the green transition is framed as a certain challenge or threat to the catch-up dynamics we see with the East. I provided you two examples, one focusing on the unequal challenges that the countries in the EU facing. Here I've focused on Germany as an example for Central European countries and Poland as an example for an Eastern European economy. And we see that one important thing to be achieved during the green transition is obviously to get away from harmful energy sources, fossil energy sources. And we see that over the last decades, the share of harmful energy sources has been much higher in Poland than in Germany. And if we look a little bit more in the future, we see that Germany and other European countries have achieved much higher shares of low carbon sources when it comes to energy generation for Poland. And this obviously means that the challenge and therefore also the transition costs to be faced by Poland during the green transition are likely to be considerably higher than for Germany and other countries. It's a similar thing when we turn to the opportunities of the green transition, because obviously it will lead to the fact that green technologies will become much more important in the future. And one way to look at the basically the starting situation of countries with regard to green technologies is, for instance, to look of how well they are doing in patenting green technologies. Here, just to illustrate, we have prepared a figure showing the patents per million people in the area of green technologies, just as an example. But again, here we see the unequal distribution of the opportunities that come with the green transition. Most of the countries scoring very well here are also part of Central Europe, of the financialized countries. Many other countries obviously do not come with the best starting position with regard to the race for the green technologies. So obviously for them, it's going to be much harder to actually effectuate and benefit from the green transition also economically. And together, I think this view on challenges and opportunities is nothing but an example for the unequal distribution of challenges and opportunities with regard to the green transitions. And I think why this is particularly important is that this inequality that we see right now can be a potential source for dangerous path dependency and polarization in the future, because the way that countries develop is often happening with regard to self-reinforcing mechanisms, and small differences today can turn into a large difference in the future. And this is particularly relevant since many of the countries who perceive themselves as losers of the green transformation or green transition might also have the institutional possibilities to block policy measures that are relevant to make the green transition actually work. So I think something that needs to be avoided is that countries also perceive themselves to be losing relative to others with regard to the green transition, meaning that this idea of making the green transition work and addressing the convergence issue in the European Union are two problems that should be and must be thought together. And how this is going to be done, I think Jakob is taking over.
Cool. Thanks, Claudius. Hi, everyone. Yeah, exactly. So we need to get it done together, right? So how to achieve convergence and the green transformation at the same time. And the good thing is that the EU is recognizing, that this is really a substantial challenge. So for instance, in the Green Deal communication, it states that not all member states, regions, and cities start the transition from the same point. And by the way, the picture in the background is from Bulgaria. It's a slum in Bulgaria. And I think we often tend to forget how unequal, the starting points of countries actually are. However, it's good that the EU is realizing that this is a challenge, and the Commission is doing something about it. So for instance, there's the Cohesion Fund, and more recently we also have the Just Transition Fund, and they all direct funds into poorer European regions, which is certainly really good because it works towards achieving more convergence in the EU. And more recently, we also have the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the Corona response mechanism, basically, of the EU. And what you can see here is indicated by the dot size, basically, that you see on the map, where the money of the RRF went. And what you can see is that it also went asymmetrically more to poorer regions in the EU, which is really great because it works also towards achieving more convergence. And another benefit of the Recovery and Resilience Facility is that a certain amount, 37% of it, have a green conditionality attached. So the investments there need to be made for the green economy. So it also helps us to create green economies in those countries, which is essential, as Claudius pointed out earlier. And there are also other, these are just examples. There are obviously also other things like Repower EU working on these challenges and so on and so forth. So there's a lot been done that goes in the right direction. However, if we look at kind of what we need to get done, I think this figure is pretty illustrating. It comes from McKinsey, and they say that we need 933 billion additional yearly investments to achieve net zero by 2050. And we're just talking about achieving net zero here. So we're not talking about the biodiversity crisis or anything else, or about cohesion goals or any other social goals. And that adds up to a staggering 28 trillion that we need to invest. And if we take the RRF, for instance, the 37% of that, they are, if you put that together, if you sum that up, that's about 270 billion. So that's basically 1% of where we need to be. So it's still quite a long way to go, while there are some good things being done, we need to do quite a lot more. And at the same time, there are unfortunately also still some regulations in place, like the lifting of state aid rules, or the relaxation of state aid rules under the temporary crisis framework that has been done in reaction to the recent crisis. And what happened there is that governments have been allowed to, subsidize their economies in reaction to the crisis, which is really great. That's really needed. But it led to a situation where Germany, put 350 billion roughly euros in their economy, while the rest of the EU combined only had a sum of a little more than 100 billion. So these instruments, then, the way that they're implemented, while the idea is good, it leads to more divergence again, because the economies that are already doing really well, they asymmetrically benefit from this. So overall, the EU is recognizing that this is a challenge. Also the combination, achieving convergence and the green transformation at the same time, that is related, that we have to do something about it. There are some things that are being done, but it's unfortunately not really enough yet. And there are also some instruments still in place that work in the other direction. Now, there are some people that, argue quite a lot that, markets would fix this. And we don't really have to do anything about this. There will be private investors, and, they would just fill this gap of the investments we need, and then markets will do the rest, and everything's going to be fine. And oh boy, we tried that for the last 4 years, and it led us to the situation where we are now. Claudius showed us where we are in terms of convergence, so we're not doing really well. And the countries that actually converge, they, like they did that with a very unsustainable model. And if we look at emissions, we're also not doing really well, in terms of achieving the 1.5 degree goal. We are very far away from where we have to be. So this, market-focused approach that the EU took in the last 40 years, it didn't really deliver. And there's a good reason for that, because we're expecting too much of markets, Markets are not made to solve these kind of problems. They will never solve these kind of problems because that's not what they're meant to do. So we need something else also. And I'm gonna talk a bit about why markets cannot do that. And the number that you see here, the figure that you see here, is one of the major reasons. 60% of the necessary investments of that 28 trillion that we need, they don't have a business case. They just don't have a business case. So there is no reason for private investors to invest into that because there is no business case. There's no profit to be made. But we still need those investments. Otherwise, we will not be carbon neutral. So, we're going to need the government here to support this. Otherwise, we will not achieve net zero by 2050 ever, and markets won't do that. If you are interested in this topic and you want to read out more a bit on investment needs and what the EU can do about it, you can also go to our website and have a look at some of the reports that we wrote. Particularly these two are very relevant in that regard. But it's not only about investments. Investments is one thing, but there is another reason why markets alone won't be able, to fix this problem, and that's path dependencies. Now, economic development works in a path-dependent way. What that means is that, if an economy embarked on a certain path, then it cannot just jump somewhere else, but it's somehow constrained by the path. And one reason for that is that there are preconditions for production. So for instance, if a country is really good in producing pharmaceuticals, they didn't just get there, but you need universities that provide, research for new pharmaceutical innovations. The universities need to be closely connected to the industry so that the new innovations, can come to the market. You need the skills in the people. You need to train the people to work in those industries. You need a specific service sector that focuses on that particular industry. For instance, advertisement, has been done in a way that it really works for the pharmaceutical industry, and so on and so on and so on, infrastructure and so forth. And, you don't just build that. And if a country already has it, then, for market actors, there's no real reason to build all that up somewhere else because it's really costly, especially for high-tech production. This is particularly the case. And there's a second, there are more path dependencies, but those two are the ones that are particularly relevant for the problem that we're talking about here. There's a second one, which is relatedness of technological capabilities. So, a country that is really good in producing pharmaceuticals, for that country, it might be really easy to also produce, soap or something like that, or other chemicals. But it might be very hard if they don't do anything in that direction yet to produce car engines, because it needs a very different technologies. And that's because technologies are related. So some technologies are very similar. They need similar capabilities, and others are kind of further away. And that also, kind of determines in a way, or at least has an impact on the options that a country has to develop itself economically in the future. But we have to do something about it. We have to break those path dependencies, and markets won't do that. And we have to do that because, we need the poorer European regions and countries to build, economic structures that are actually sustainable, green economies. And that won't just happen, and we also need to build, generally speaking, we need to build much more production capacities for green products, because we are very far away from producing enough heat pumps and solar panels and all that kind of stuff. And doing that in regions, where there is not so much, or where there are not so much technological capabilities yet, that won't just happen. We need to do something about it. So markets won't fix this, but fortunately, we can fix it, and we can fix it with industrial policy. And I'm an extreme industrial policy wonk. I've been for many, many years, and I've tried to convince many people in the past 10 years that industrial policy is really important, and we need to talk about it. And we need to, look at industrial policy from all the angles, from the social policy side, from the economic policy side, and we need to together do good, proper industrial policy. No one believed me in the last 10 years. I'm extremely happy that since a few months, everyone is all of a sudden really interested in industrial policy. So that's great. Okay, but there are also still some people that are a bit afraid of industrial policy because they fear, that if we do industrial policy, we will just keep unproductive activities alive. We will put subsidies in the economy, and then people would just use that for profit. So there will be profit capture and all these kind of things. We're going to support the wrong industries. So there's a lot of worry about it, and rightfully so, because industrial policy can be done really wrong. And if you do it wrong, it's not going to deliver what we want. Luckily, we can learn from the past because, in the heydays of industrial policy in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on, there were some countries that did industrial policy really well, and we can learn from that. And what I'm talking about are the East Asian miracles, so countries like Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and some others, and they managed in a very short period of time to develop their economies from essentially agricultural, economies without many technological capabilities to become superstars, international superstars of high-tech production. And the way they did this is, one, they took, the technological relatedness, the path dependencies I've been talking about before, they took that into consideration, and they really kind of worked their way up. So South Korea, for instance, they started with fairly low-tech shipbuilding in the beginning, and then, through certain support of certain other industries, they worked their way up the technological ladder to really high-tech production. And the way they did it is by combining carrots and sticks, and this is really important. So what they did is they handed out subsidies or tax cuts, depending on the country, but they didn't just do that for a second and said, okay, fine, here you have it, but they made those subsidies conditional on performance. So they said, okay, well, look, this whole sector, they're going to get subsidies, but all the companies, they need to fulfill certain performance goals. They need to achieve certain goals. And if they don't, the subsidies will be taken away again. And that led to a situation where only the most productive firms survived while the others essentially died. And that makes it impossible, to keep very unproductive firms alive. Profit capture doesn't really work because, then other companies will get the subsidies in the future and so on and so forth. And we can essentially take this approach today and learn from it. And, with the new Net Zero Industry Act, that's the name, that's going to be presented soon, like we can use these principles of the past and learn from that today. And unfortunately, like we've looked at the draft, and unfortunately, it seems right now, at least, like we are like repeating some of the mistakes of the past, and we don't do carrots and sticks, because right now, the Net Zero Industrial Plan only entails carrots, unfortunately, and the funds that should be given away there, it's not specified where, but what we need is we need to put support into the economies that are poor right now, that need a green development model, and not just anywhere. So right now we run the risk that Germany will again asymmetrically benefit from the new Industrial Act. So that would be really, really unfortunate. I'm really hoping that we can learn from the past here. So anyway, we know what we need to get done. We need to support industries in poorer European regions, green industries, and we know how to do it. We need to apply carrots and sticks. The only open question is which industries to support. And Claudius and I have been working the last year on a paper which provides a framework for policymakers to do exactly that, to pick the right industrial sectors to support. And Claudius is going to present very briefly how that works.
Yeah, thank you, Jakob. So what we did is actually we sat together and we thought what would be properties of sectors or industries that should be supported in a given country, and we came up with three basic requirements that every such sector should fulfill, two of which are quite evident. So first of all, obviously, the economic activities pursued by these industries should be ecologically sustainable. Otherwise, they wouldn't contribute to the green transition, and they wouldn't be really future fit. Secondly, they should also be economically viable in the sense that these sectors have the possibility to become competitive on international markets, that it's probable that there will be demand for the products and services provided by these sectors, and so on and so forth. And the third requirement relates to what Jakob was saying before. They need to be related to the existing capabilities in the country we are talking about. And because this third aspect appears to us to be the most intricate one in this context, I want to use the last 3 minutes to actually talk about this problem of relatedness. So Jakob already indicated that countries cannot move from one set of economic activities to another. Countries in this sense, I mean, it has had a base in how firms actually learn to pursue new activities, and this obviously has to do with how humans learn to pursue new activities. And the thing is that we usually learn step by step. So we don't learn something that is completely unrelated to what we already know, but we learn things that are related to what we already know. There is a scientific tool to formalize this relatedness. These are the so-called skill relatedness networks. This is here an example for Ireland. They always look like this, that they have many nodes in there. Every node represents a certain economic sector, like, for example, mining, construction, healthcare, etc. And there are links between these nodes. And these links illustrate how related the capabilities required by these sectors are. And in this visualization, it's such that sectors that are very similar in the sense that they are skill related are close to each other, and those sectors that are not related to each other are far from each other. And these networks are computed usually based on previous labor flows. So, for example, you look at how many workers in the past managed to move from the construction sector to the mining sector, and the more workers have achieved that in the past, the more related seem to be the capability requirements in these sectors, and the more related they are in terms of skill relatedness. And here you obviously see that a country that focuses very much on mining activities might do a reasonably good job in moving more towards the construction sector, but it will be much more difficult to move to a focus in finance or healthcare, because these latter two sectors are much less related. And that means that new activities, when we think about that, need to be related to present ones, meaning good industrial policy must take this into account, because it doesn't make much sense to aim for the moonshot and turning into a country that focuses very much on mining directly into a country that focuses on education, healthcare, or paperwork. So you need to think stepwise on how to achieve your overall goal. One thing that aggravates this challenge is that these skill-related networks look quite differently for different countries. So relatedness is country-specific. So in the paper with Jakob, we focused on Germany and Hungary. And if we look at the relatedness measures for Germany and Hungary, and we the relatedness networks for Germany and Hungary looked very similarly, we would see a graph like this if we plot German skill relatedness against Hungarian skill relatedness. So this would be the situation where two sectors that are highly related in Germany are also highly related in Hungary. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like this. It looks more like that, at least in the case of Germany and Hungary. And that obviously aggravates the whole problem of designing industrial policy, because it shows that transition strategies that might work well in Germany because they take seriously the relatedness structure of the German industry might not work very well in Hungary, because they do not fit to the relatedness structure in Hungary. So we need to pay attention to country specificities here as well. And this would be the last point. So I want to come back to the 4 key messages we started the presentation with, which are hopefully better substantiated right now. We started from the observation that the green transition is essential, but that it comes with opportunities and challenges that are distributed very unequally across countries and regions in the EU. And that if we don't do anything about that, this might lead to an increase of inequality, and that this in turn bears the danger of polarization, which is against the fundamental idea of convergence, but is also posing a real threat to the implementation of the green transition. To address this, we are not without any tools. A reasonable mix of active industrial and energy policy could help us here. We shouldn't make the mistake of only focusing on market-based policy or only focusing on pure subsidize, but we need to think a little bit carefully about how to design the industrial policy sets we are talking about. These policy sets are most likely to be country-specific. Rules that apply to all countries equally might be a nice baseline, but they should be more concretized during the course of designing the final industrial policy. So these are the 4 clear messages. Obviously, this is an important field with many open questions. Here are just a few of them we consider important. I'm pretty sure you can come up with more. But what we currently do not understand very well in Europe is what are the country-specific key vulnerabilities and opportunities with regard to the green transition. I think this would be interesting to look at. This question of which industries to support, which to phase out, needs definitely much more work also for the specific countries. Also to study how the skill relatedness differs across different countries and how this translates into country-specific industrial policy tools is also something that seems to be under-researched to us. But also this more meta question of how we can get the political support to actually implement these industrial policies. It's a highly politicized affair, and it's important to keep that in mind as well. We are doing some work on this, so there is this shameless self-plug at the very end. We have this work on Germany and Hungary, where we try to delineate this framework of how to identify future fit replacement sectors for those who are threatened by the current developments. In another project, we look at Germany and Poland on the micro, meso, macro level, where we also do interviews and where we try to find out what could be country-specific strategies to actually get this industrial policies done that would help us to get the green transition working while keeping the convergence promise seriously. So that would be it from our input. Thank you very much for the attention, and yeah, we're looking forward to the discussion, questions, and exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, and I'm sure there are quite some questions. And I mean, over to you, Nadia. You want to go for the questions?
Yes. Well, also from my side, thanks a lot. I think we've heard very, very interesting insights. And so my name is Nadia Najar, and I work for DG Employment, the unit for fair, green, digital transitions and research. So of course, as you also highlighted, this making the Green Deal really fair and reducing inequalities across regions and member states is kind of our core work and tasks. And I've seen quite a lot of interesting questions in the Slido. Please also feel free to add further ones while we speak. But as kind of the central theme of inequalities across regions and countries, I think there was quite an interesting question on how do you see and what is the role of cooperation between different regions and countries to really overcome these divides that could be slowing down the green transition? So yeah, what is the role then, the active role also of member states and regions to cooperate to avoid this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, we've been talking quite a lot about technological relatedness, right? And if we look at supply chains to produce things, and I mean, with the new Industry Act, like what Europe's trying to do essentially is to establish more European supply chains, right? That's one of the things that we try to do. And you know, to establish a full supply chain, you need all sorts of different technologies usually, right? Because you have like different stages in the production and you need different technologies for each stage. And then, different regions in Europe might have different technological capabilities. So it makes a lot of sense when you think about establishing full supply chains, or also onshoring parts of existing supply chains that are only partly in Europe right now, to like look at different regions and have a proper conversation about like where it makes the most sense, technologically speaking, to establish the industry. So I think like there's a big place in regional cooperation in this regard for sure.
And yeah.
You go.
I don't know if Claudius also wanted to add. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, as you say, that across the value chain there's a lot of chance to cooperate. So you talked a lot about the technical capabilities. There were also some questions, and you also talked about the skills relatedness. So there's some questions on how can we really incentivize this relatedness and technological developments towards a green transition, and also what are the skills differences between countries, or how can we as well kind of ensure that different skills for the green transition are fostered. I mean, we also have the European Year of Skills. So in that sense, what would be a good strategy for that?
Okay. So I can make some preliminary general comments. I mean, there's obviously a certain danger of trade-off here, right? If you say you are focusing on countries that already are very related to green technologies, and you really focus on these countries, there is obviously the danger that those countries who are very unrelated to these activities are losing further ground. So I think if from the European level, this is the first thing actually to avoid. So it's not about maximizing policy support for countries that are already related to green technologies, but it's important to keep this balance in mind with regard to different regions. This also relates to the point of regional collaboration in the sense that maybe not every country needs to be good in every sector, and there can be collaboration across countries, especially with firms over countries, where firms in certain countries complement their skill set from other countries, allowing them to achieve something that they couldn't have done without the collaboration of other firms. These are all aspects that from a supranational perspective and from the EU level could be governed by, for example, paying only conditional subsidies or channeling them into the right directions. On the country level, obviously, it makes a lot of sense if when it comes to the sectors that you identify as those where you want to actively support firms using this carrots and sticks thing that Jakob was talking about. There, this relatedness should be taken into account when designing the actual policies, when you decide where to put your subsidies or where you actually put the support for different sectors. It's not about only talking about the final goal, but you need to think about what are the sectors sufficiently related to what your country firms are actually doing. Jakob, you wanted to complement that, I guess.
Yeah, maybe just to add a quick thought on it. I talked about the conditionalities earlier, right? And you asked about like how to steer this in a green direction. And one way, you can design conditionalities for industry support is you can make it conditional on green goals also. So you can make it conditional on performance goals to make sure that, there's, subsidies aren't just used for profits and things like that. And that makes a lot of sense. But if you want to push industries to transform themselves, for instance, you can also make it conditional on achieving certain, transformation goals. And that can also help to push this in the right direction.
And I think so. One of the questions, it was also on really how to, because you said that there are certain countries that have already established economic models, etc., based on their expertise in certain technologies. So also how how can we kind of move this towards green technologies, for example, in countries where this expertise is not present. So to really ensure also, as you said, having this balanced development across member states.
Yeah, I think there again, like I will refer a bit to history here, because I think like South Korea is for instance really interesting, because they started really, you know, building ships in the beginning because like they didn't have a lot of technologies, but they wanted to be an international superstar high-tech microchip producer, which they are now. And the way to get there, you know, was through all the steps in between. So you cannot expect Hungary, for instance, to be tomorrow the, you know, new international superstar solar panel battery producer, because the technology is not there yet probably. So we need to get there step by step. And it doesn't really work if you just put general subsidies for the production of batteries and solar panels and heat pumps and that stuff into the economy, because that doesn't, like, that's not a proper plan how you develop the economies of those countries. You really need to make proper plans of how you get from A to B technology-wise and what the steps are in between. Otherwise, you know, it won't work. It just won't work. But we need to do it, because if we don't do it, you know, like those countries won't have those industries. They won't see a green, you know, development pathway, and they won't be interested in supporting further climate policies at the EU level, and they can essentially block it. So we kind of have to do it. It's painful. It takes a lot of time. It's costly, you know, because we have similar industries in other countries already, but I don't see a way around it. And we also want to, you know, like do justice to the promise of convergence in the EU, right? So like we kind of have to do that, and we have to do it with proper industrial plans. Otherwise it won't work.
Maybe one little question here. If you think of a country like Germany that is phasing out some industries as well, let's think about the car industry, for example. They would also be interested in getting some other new industries, I guess. So how would they compete with Hungary or with Poland or with others, or how would they cooperate? And what would you tell them?
You want to say something first, Claudius? I can. Oh, okay. Okay, I will just go. So, okay. So the paper that Claudius was referring to is looking exactly at that question, right? So the question of what happens if certain industries that don't really have a future, because like we have those future fit industries, right? That's the ones that we want to grow, but there's this big elephant in the room that they are also industries that will potentially disappear. And we can do that in a very uncoordinated manner and just like introduce high CO2 prices, and then some industries just disappear. Like for instance, in Germany, certain car manufacturers, especially the suppliers that build like the combustion engines, you know, they don't really have a future if we only have EVs. Let's see if the lobbying efforts are successful, but yeah, anyway, you know, and then the big question is what happens and what can we do about it? And by looking at skill relatedness and understanding, you know, where those workers could work, you can make plans for each country. So for Germany, what we do is we look at the skill relatedness of those sectors and we see, okay, well, the workers of the automotive supply chain, they could potentially work in those and those and those other sectors. Then we can look at which of those sectors have like low emission intensity or like, you know, green and future fit in that sense, and are potentially also economically competitive. And then we know which other sectors make sense to support in Germany. And we can do a similar exercise in Hungary and start there, you know, from where they stand. And I wouldn't see that so much as a trade-off right now, to be honest, as in, you know, they are competing, because like the technology segments European countries are in are very different, generally speaking, especially the poorer and the richer regions. There's one reason. And the other is the markets, the green markets, they are huge. They're extremely big, and we are very far away from producing enough of the products we need. You know, like you saw the investment gap in the beginning, that translates to new products we need, loads of them. You know, we need so many heat pumps, like we have a shortage of that. We need so many solar panels, but also many other things. Like there's so much technology we need to produce in the future that right now we don't have to worry so much about like which country wins this race. Also, by the way, this whole US, EU race thingy, like that's not really our problem right now. What we have to get done is produce enough, fast enough to deal with the climate crisis and to produce jobs and social opportunities for people in poorer European regions, which we can do at the same time if we do it right.
Yeah, and that regard, we also have some questions actually on these numbers that you mentioned. So you said like there's this need for huge investments. So you said it was 933 billion euros additionally yearly, which is really huge. So one question is, does the McKinsey study only focus on a net zero EU, not decoupling of resource use from growth? If you would do that, what would change in the findings? And then there's another question on, let me just find it quickly. So in regards to this investments needed to achieve net zero, do you think orthodox fiscal monetary policies will allow us to invest this money?
All the questions for me, I'm so sorry, Claudius, but I will go for that one too. Okay, so on the 933, I'm not sure if I understand the question on decoupling right, because that's not really the focus of the report. So what the report does, it looks at like needed investments to achieve net zero. So yes, it's only net zero. They don't really assume anything about decoupling or not. As far as I'm aware, there are other estimates though. So like there are many studies, but there are several studies of investment needs. They differ in terms of like, you know, the amount that is needed. Like there are several that are in the ballpark of this McKinsey study. There's another one done by Jakob Hafele and colleagues, for instance, that gets to like, I think 875 billion yearly or something like that. So there are several different, you know, estimations of that use different ways to get there. So that's to say, and it's very hard to estimate also. So there's a level of uncertainty attached to these figures. I should add that also. What was the second question? Sorry, I wanted to say something to the second question also.
So the question was, do you think orthodox fiscal monetary policies will allow us
fiscal. Exactly. Yeah, no. Well, no. Unfortunately not. Right now, the fiscal framework that we have is essentially, well, limiting the scope, the fiscal leeway of European countries, especially the indebted ones, quite substantially. And that makes it very, very, very hard to invest enough. So one of the barriers right now for this investment is, unfortunately, for sure, the fiscal rules. But right now we're seeing, you know, that they are being revamped. And there's right now this discussion about how that's being done. And the proposal on the table right now is that member states have fiscal structural plans. And what we are hoping, you know, that they have fiscal structural plans for debt reduction in. And then that's basically negotiated with the Commission. And what we are hoping for is that there will be a way to, you know, exclude certain green investments from debt reduction pathways, or at least prolong the time, you know, that a country has to reduce its debt if it commits to investing into the green economy some money. Because, you know, if we restrict the fiscal space or the fiscal leeway that countries have too much, then they're having a hard time to get those investments done, for sure.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, Christoph, did you want to get in, or did I? No. Okay. Well, no, but I think thanks a lot. I think that that answers the question really well. So there are also some who especially had some more questions on the competitiveness between sectors and regions. So I mean, as you said, cooperation is key, and there's the need for really country-specific developments in this regard for different technologies, for different economic sectors. So here's also an interesting question: how to ensure competitiveness of regions and sectors key to the green transition, rising external competition. So, for example, solar panel production, electric cars, etc.
I mean, it's a very general question, so I'm afraid I can only give a quite general answer, referring to much what Jakob said about the industrial policy with the carrot and sticks thing. In the end, what becomes competitive, what determines the competitiveness of a sector is the firms operating within these sectors. And they just need to make sure that you support sectors where you have decided that they will be needed during the green transition. Something you can do by looking at these networks of skill relatedness. You could also look, or you do need to also look at input-output tables, because some sectors are not very sustainable, but we still need them because of their role in the input-output structure of our economy. All this must be taken into account, and then political decisions need to be made. To what extent firms receive under certain circumstances benefits that ensures that they remain competitive on international markets. And sometimes this means to counteract measures undertaken by countries from the outside. Sometimes it means that you need to counteract domestic disadvantages that the firms have. I think the really essential thing is what Jakob also said in the presentation, that you must never provide these supports in an unconditional way, because then you run the danger of actually channeling funds into firms whose future doesn't look very nice anyway, and then you're basically wasting these funds. So I'm not sure whether this actually addresses the question or whether it was more specific in this case. Nice to clarify.
Sounds very good. But maybe to round this up, as we're coming to an end, my last question would have been: you have, like, I don't know, 30 seconds in an elevator with 3 key heads of state. I think you already suggested something, but maybe Jakob, you want to finish it with, like, yeah, you have 30 seconds, and just what would they change on the Net Zero Industry Act? What would be helpful to do, or the direction or the vision behind it?
So right now we are risking that we support countries that are already doing well too much, and we need to change that. So for that, what we need to do is asymmetrically support the poorer European regions with the Net Zero Act. And second, we are risking to build, unproductive industries in the future, because we are not disciplining, industries by giving away subsidies without tying it to sticks, to concrete, conditionalities. And those conditionalities should be green conditionalities to achieve transformational goals. And it should be productivity conditionalities to make sure that the subsidies are not misused for profit capture.
Great.
That was on the spot.
It was really 30
okay,
seconds.
convincing.
Yes, sounds good. Yeah, I think we can leave it here. We have 1 minute left, and unless Nadia, you have something to add.
Well, I think within 1 minute it will be hard, but I mean, thanks a lot for everyone who sent in questions to the Slido. Very interesting, and well, thanks so much to Claudius and Jakob for answering them. Yeah, we'll definitely continue discussing and ensuring that the green transition is going to be fair, and also the opportunities will be fairly distributed and having multiple win-wins.
Nice.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation.
Yes, and also
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here, and thanks to Nadia and to the team around Frank. And don't forget to register for the next event. Should be in the chat, the link. And yeah, we'll share more information with you shortly. And yeah, thanks to the crowd. Thanks to everybody who was here today. And thanks for the questions. And have a nice day. Bye.